is Alex, and welcome to my kitchen. Today we'll be making my favorite chocolate chip cookie recipe from Alton Brown with a few alterations for convenience's sake. Let's go over the ingredients. I'll be using weight measurements, both for consistency's sake and because it usually means there's fewer dishes to wash. But if you don't have a kitchen scale, I've included volumetric conversions in the description so that you can follow along. We'll need 2 sticks of butter, 8 ounces of brown sugar, 2 ounces of white sugar, 1 whole egg and 1 egg yolk, 2 tablespoons of milk, 1.5 teaspoons of vanilla extract, 1 teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of baking soda, 12 ounces of all-purpose flour, and about 12 ounces of chocolate chips. The differences from the original recipe are primarily that I'm going to be using all-purpose flour where the original calls for bread flour. Bread flour will make a chewier cookie, but I haven't noticed that big of a difference, and I usually have more all-purpose flour on hand, so I use that. And while the recipe does call for 12 ounces of chocolate chips, the brand of chocolate chips that I use comes in 11.5 ounce bags or sometimes 10 ounce bags, and I find that 1 bag is usually good. So I'm going to use that. For equipment, you'll need a few bowls, 1 large bowl for your sugar and your butter, a medium-sized bowl for your dry ingredients, a small bowl for your wet ingredients, and another small bowl for cracking your eggs. You'll also need a medium-sized frying pan for melting and browning your butter, measuring spoons, a regular spoon, a fork, and a kitchen scale, or if you're using volumetric measurements, you'll need a set of measuring cups. You'll also need something to mix with. You can use a stand mixer, a hand mixer, or a mixing spoon, and a spatula to scrape down your bowls. For our first step, we're going to measure out our sugar and then set it aside while we measure out our other ingredients. So first, 8 ounces of brown sugar. And if you're using volumetric measurements, you're going to want to pack the brown sugar into your measuring cup. Since we are weighing it out, we don't have to do that. Okay, I went a little bit over, so we're going to take some back out. And that's 8 ounces. So that's what that looks like. Now for the granulated sugar, be a little bit more careful with how I'm putting this in because I'm putting it directly in and it's going to be harder to scoop out than the brown sugar was. There we go. That was 2 ounces of white sugar. All right, then we'll set that to the side. And then we'll measure our dry ingredients into this bowl. So we're going to want the flour, the baking soda, the salt, and our measuring spoons. About 12 ounces flour, there we go, that is 12 ounces. And then when you are measuring out your salt and your baking soda, you're going to want to level off the spoon. And in the baking soda, there is a very convenient flat flap of cardboard in the box, precisely for that reason. You put a teaspoon in, and then when I measure my salt, what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure it over my hand. I'm not going to measure it directly over the bowl because we don't want to accidentally put way too much salt in and have that spill over. So I'm going to do that over to the side, and I just give it a little shake to level. And then get rid of that excess salt. So that's our dry ingredients. And in the original recipe, It says to sift it, but I find that it's usually fine to just give it a stir with the spoon and mix all of those together. Now we will put that off to the side. And now it's time for our wet ingredients. So we're going to want 1 whole egg and 1 egg yolk. I'd recommend separating the egg first. That way, if you mess up, you get a second shot. So I gave it a sharp tap against the edge of the bowl. That gets me a pretty clean break. And then I'm just gently transferring it to the other shell to get rid of all of that white into the bowl. And then I put the eggshells down the garbage disposal. For the whole egg, instead of cracking it against the side of the bowl like I did when I was separating the egg, I'm going to crack it against the surface of the counter. The reason why I'm doing that is because that will cause larger, chunkier breaks in the shell, and that way if any gets into my bowl, it's easier to remove, but it's also less likely to get into the bowl in the first place. So sharp tap against the counter, and then break into the bowl and put that away. All right, now I'm gonna wash my hands because they're covered in egg and that's gross. Now with my washed and dried hands, going to take my fork. You can use a whisk for this, but forks are easier to clean and it works just as well for this purpose. So I'm gonna use a fork, and you're going to break the yolks and just beat it with the fork. Just using a small motion with my wrist. And you don't need to whisk them that much, just enough to get everything all mixed together. And then add in the 2 tablespoons of milk and your vanilla extract, 1.5 teaspoons. And mix those together with the fork. Now that's all combined. I'll set it off to the side. I'm done with the fork now. I'm not done with the spoon. The spoon we'll use later. So we'll set it to the side, but the fork can go in the sink. Now we're going to move on to the butter and browning that. So let's move to the stove. For these cookies, we're going to be browning the butter. We're going to do that because it will bring out the nutty flavors in the butter and add a real depth of flavor to the cookie as a whole. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take your butter and put it in your frying pan over your favorite stove burner. And then we're going to put that over a medium heat. You don't want to put the temperature too high because you want to be gentle with it. We don't want to burn the butter, we just want to brown it. So, browning the butter is a step that will take a bit of patience. It takes a while to brown the butter, but as you do this more and more, you'll get a better sense for how long it takes and when you really need to pay attention to the butter. When I make these cookies, I normally start this as the first step, and then I go measure all of the other ingredients while the butter is melting and getting its way to browning. But for now, we're just going to stay on the butter so I can really show you all of the stages. It'll be easier to see when the butter is browned if you're using a light colored pan, but I only own dark colored frying pans. So I'll be able to show you what it looks like in a darker colored pan and also show you some of the other cues for when it's ready and when you really need to pay attention to it. I usually listen to the butter. So right now it's really quiet because it's just melting, and then later it will get quite loud when all of the water content is starting to boil off of the butter, it'll be like hissing and spitting, and then it will get quite quiet again, and it'll be sort of crackling and foaming. And that's when you really need to pay attention to it, when it's at that crackling, foaming stage, because that is when it is going to be starting to brown, to really brown, and it can move from browning to burnt very quickly. So when the butter gets quiet, that's when you need to pay attention. So as you can see, it's starting to spit a little bit now. And get a little bit louder. Just gonna give it a shake. Shaking it helps keep everything a little more even as far as the temperature goes. It mixes things around, makes sure the hotter stuff at the bottom moves up to the top, cooler stuff from the top moves down. There you can hear it. It's getting louder now. You do want to be careful with the butter right now, not worrying about it browning, but it is spitting quite a bit, or it can spit quite a bit, and you want to be careful not to get hot butter on your arms or your hands, so just sort of keep a little distance. We're starting to get closer now, so we'll see it's gone from that like really big bubbles and spitting to now it's got this like white foam on the top, and you can hear it's a lot quieter now also, and then you'll see brown flecks starting to come up to the top. And when you see those brown flecks, I like to let mine get pretty dark, but you want to really pay attention to it right now, because like I said earlier, it can go from brown to burnt really quickly. Okay, I'm happy with how dark those flecks are, so I'm going to take it off the heat and we're going to immediately dump this into our sugar, and I'm going to scrape the butter out of the pan. Make sure to get all of those lovely, delicious brown bits right into the sugar. Now that we've put our butter in with our sugar, we're going to mix it. We're going to mix it for a few minutes, and you're not going to see much of a visual difference, but the mixing helps it cool down faster, and we want the butter to be a lot cooler than it is right now before we add the egg in, so that we don't scramble our eggs. And feeling the bottom to take stock of the temperature, and it's still quite hot. This will take a few minutes to cool down. And you'll see as I'm stirring them together, it's got a sort of grainy texture to it. You can still really see the sugar and the butter are separate. They're going to come together when we add the egg mixture. All right, that should be cool enough. So I'm going to add in the egg mixture using the spatula to scrape down the bowl. And then we're just gonna stir that all together. Now you can really see sort of changes to a more opaque caramely color. You can see little flecks of brown in it as well. That's our lovely browned butter. Don't need to mix that for very long, just till it comes together. And then we're going to take our dry ingredients and mix those in just a little bit at a time. A good general rule of thumb is to mix in 1/3 of your dry ingredients at a time. Put that in. As even with the wooden spoon, I am making sure to scrape around the edge, but I will go back in with my spatula to make sure I get everything. It'll start getting thicker. About another third of my dry ingredient mixture. Now I'm gonna go scrape down the sides. And then put the last portion in. And it's all right if you have a little bit of the flour left, because you don't want to over mix it. So it's okay if you can still see a little bit of the flour mixture in it, because we're also going to add the chocolate chips and mix those in. So there'll be a little mixing yet after, so it doesn't, though all the white doesn't need to be totally gone. Just gonna scrape down the edges one more time. And I'm gonna get the chocolate chips. Just dump all of those in. Yum. All right, that looks all mixed together now. So, at this point, you can bake them right now if you want to. I know how hard it can be to wait, especially after you've just gone through all of that work, but it will be better if you give it a little bit of time to rest in the fridge. So we're going to let this rest for 1 hour. And what that does is it lets the flour hydrate and it will stop it from spreading so much in the oven. So what we're gonna do now is we're going to steal a little bit of this dough, put it in the fridge, and then I'm gonna wash the dishes. See you in an hour. All right, it has been a little over an hour. It's dark out now, and it is time to bake our cookies. Yay! So first I'm going to start preheating the oven. The oven is going to preheat to 375 degrees. And while that's preheating, we'll parcel out the cookies. Set that going. Now I'm just going to put 6 cookies on the tray right now because this dough refrigerates really well. And I like having dough in the fridge so that when I want a cookie, I can bake it fresh. So a little bit of dough, about 1 big spoonful. You can make them smaller if you want. You can make them bigger if you want. So I'm gonna do that. You can tell that since it was in the fridge, it is a lot more solid than it was before, which is awesome. That means it will spread way less than if we had baked them fresh from mixing. It's because the butter's a lot colder mostly, but also the flour is more hydrated because it's had time to sort of even out. That's good. I'm just sort of rolling them and squishing them in my palm. If I think it's a little big, I'll just take a little pinch off, put it back in the bowl. Do that next time. All right. That is 6 cookies. And then with the rest of this dough, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take some wax paper and I'm doing this because if the dough sits in the fridge for too long, it can get really hard, sort of like too frozen ice cream, and it's really hard to scoop it out of the bowl. So, while it is still really easy to work with, I'm going to sort of mold it into logs on the wax paper and roll it up. And that way later when I want to make cookies, I can just cut the log into sections that are the size that I want and bake them that way. Sort of like those logs of cookie dough that you can buy at the grocery store. You can just break off chunks. I'm going to make 2 logs here on this paper. And then I'll just take one edge and roll it and sort of squish everything into a vaguely cylindrical shape. And then do the same with the other side. Then I have 2 logs of dough all wrapped up in paper, and that can go in the fridge. The oven is preheated, so I'm just going to pop these in and set the timer to 16 minutes. In your oven, it might not be 16 minutes. If your oven runs hot, they'll take a little less time. If your oven runs cold, they'll take a little longer. You'll get to know your own oven better the more you bake with it. And in the future, you can adjust your oven temperature accordingly. Also, if the dough is colder, they'll take longer to bake. Right now, it will take about 15 to 16 minutes in my oven, but tomorrow, when the dough has been in the fridge for a while, it will probably take a couple more minutes for them to be done. So I've just pulled these out. I pulled them out 2 minutes early. I don't think they're quite done yet, but I just wanted to show you what they look like when they're not quite done. So if you look here, you see that's still like a little shiny, a little liquidy. Same over here, this middle looks a little soft. If I poke it, it's very soft. These are a little more solid if I poke them. I'm poking very gently right now. It's nice around the edges, that's very good. But I think that these could use 2 more minutes in the oven. So I am going to put them back in. And that's what they look like when they are almost done, but not quite. But I'd also happily eat these cookies. Yes, these look great. This one still looks a little soft around the middle, but when I touch it, it's a little firmer than it was before. And I do like my cookies slightly underdone, so that's good for me. And then the ones around the edges here are more done than the ones in the middle. That's why sometimes a recipe will say to rotate your baking sheets in the middle, because it bakes unevenly in the oven. So these look great. I'm gonna let them cool down for a couple of minutes, and then I'm gonna eat some cookies. Great, the cookies have cooled down just a little bit, so they're a good temperature for eating. Let's grab one. Break this. Here's the crumb. All right. And do you want one? Yeah, it's really good. So that was chocolate chip cookies, and I hope you're following along, and I hope your cookies also taste delicious. Happy baking! Woo! Woo!
Yes. It was a nice outro.